Hello and welcome to MovieMambo. I'm Greg Butler.
And I'm Cesar Garcia. As Ballerina, the latest John Wick film, hits cinemas, it's time for some fighting talk as we decide on our favorite cinematic punch-ups.
So, step into the ring, get ready to rumble. It's time for MovieMambo. There's something I've been wanting to do for quite a while.
What was it? Oh, well, I have a glass of water. Let me pour it down.
Oh, you didn't have to do it for real.
We don't have to start fighting each other.
Of course we're joking. But that's the beauty of films and podcasts, isn't it? Because most of it comes from the sound, doesn't it?
In podcast it does. Not so much in cinema.
Oh, it plays a great big part. It plays more than a 50% part.
Interesting.
Most of my favourite fight scenes are very heavy on the sounds, as you will find out very shortly.
When was the last time you were in a fight?
The last time I was in a fight, fortunately, was not this century. It was in the late 90s.
It was in the 19th century.
Yes, it felt like it. And I got accosted by some hoodlums and a girl and got into a bit of a fracas before getting on a bus. And then I remember getting on the bus having had my hair pulled by some young lady. By the way, I hadn't done anything wrong. I'd just like to say it was unprovoked.
That's what everyone says in prison.
I was playing football with a can on the street and I obviously pissed them off in some way.
So you hit them with a...
I don't think it hit them. Anyway, they went crazy at me. They were very drunk. I was drunk. Ended up getting on the bus and being very shaken by it and very freaked out. And nothing like that has ever happened again since. What about yourself? I imagine you get into skirmishes all the time.
Every week. I was going to say, that's probably... The story you told is probably better than some of the fights that we have in our list. I want to watch it
I mean,
now.
it did go on for quite some time. It went on for about, at least 5 or 6 minutes, as most of our fights do we're going to be talking about. So what about yourself? You're a pacifist.
I like watching fights in movies. I don't really get into fights that often. The last one and the only one was probably early 2000s. I think I was 17 or 18 and it was in a night out. And it was actually with a friend, so that's how ridiculous it was.
Had he kissed your girlfriend? So, why are we doing fights?
Because Ballerina just came out and it's part of the John Wick universe. John Wick famous for the shootouts and for the fights. So we thought, okay, let's celebrate probably a type of scene that we both love in different ways.
Yeah, I mean, since the start of cinema, fighting has been a very big part of it. I mean, if you just think about entertainment since the dawn of time, fighting has been a big part of it. There's always been a spectacle, hasn't it? Whether we like it or not, whether it's boxing, gladiatorial matches, wrestling.
I mean, even on Westerns, all of those brawls that they could have. So it's definitely a type of action sequence that has evolved a lot. I even argue that it's probably one of those that you can definitely see a massive progression over time.
Yeah.
Like you could argue I definitely say if we're talking musical numbers, I don't think we've topped Gene Kelly or we haven't topped Fred Astaire in the last 20 years. But a lot of the fights that happened in the last 30 years because of the technical expertise on camera, because of the choreography, and just
certain individuals, stars of fighting cinema, shall we say, some of which we could mention now. In fact, let's just mention them anyway. Without the likes of Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan, Jean-Claude Van Damme, if you want. There's all these action stars. But we had
Steven
all these
Seagal.
Stars. We had all these stars
Seagal
that came
is
out,
definitely
particularly
tier
in the
3.
70s and even more so in the 80s, who were stars mainly for fighting. All right, Stallone's career went a bit more than Rocky, but Dolph Lundgren, Jean-Claude Van Damme, Cynthia Rothrock, Chuck Norris,
Donnie Yen, Jet Li, Sammo Hung, like a lot of those people that they became gigantic stars. And that's probably the big difference in fight scenes, or I guess in action films in the last 50 years, which is that in the 80s and to a point early 90s, most of the most famous people that participated in fight scenes were actually people that they were specialists in action. Most of those people, they were either black belt in karate or in taekwondo or in 3 of those specialisms combined. Well, from the late 90s, especially getting into the 2000s, I would argue probably from Liam Neeson getting on Taken, Jason Bourne, obviously with Matt Damon, John Wick with Keanu Reeves, even Charlize Theron have done some amazing fighting in 2 of the films. You get actors that are mainly dramatic actors that they learn fighting to do these scenes.
Also, of course, The Matrix, Keanu Reeves.
Oh, yes.
I mean, The Matrix really...
Well, Keanu Reeves twice, you're right. John Wick and The Matrix.
But The Matrix, for me, is probably the most influential Western film on the modern fight scenes. And this, of course, came from the big influence of Asian cinema.
I think The Matrix, for a few years, was probably the most influential. I think the most influential now is probably John Wick, if I'm honest.
Right, but doesn't surely... that comes from The Matrix.
You think?
Keanu Reeves, became like a star of...
But the fighting scenes is very different. I think
sure. But,
The Matrix felt almost like blending Hollywood action and Hollywood sci-fi with Chinese wire. I think it's called wire fu.
Wire fu, yeah.
Yeah, when they mix some kung fu with wires, yeah.
Great name as well. I really like that. It's a good name for a band, though, I think, wire fu. It probably already exists. And there's one guy that's really responsible for that, and that's the choreographer Yun Wu Ping, who was the main choreographer on The Matrix, and who also worked on Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which was a massive influence on Western cinema, as was Kill Bill, which he worked on, and he'd made his name in Hong Kong cinema beforehand. There's several others, sort of key players that certainly had a big influence on Western cinema. Chad Stahelski's influence on John Wick, who was not only the director but the choreographer, I think, as well. And Jeff Imada, who was the main choreographer on the Bourne series. And the Bourne series, I think it's quite important as well in some ways.
So that's one of the big differences, and that's why, to me, John Wick is such a milestone in fights cinema. So Chad Stahelski actually met Keanu Reeves in The Matrix because he was his stand-double. And then in John Wick, he became the director, as much as you were saying, the fight choreographer. And one of the big differences, I would say, of the last 15 years when it comes to fight scenes and action films is that a lot of stunt doubles and stunt coordinators, they became directors.
Right.
And Chad Stahelski is one of them. I think the guy that did The Fall Guy.
The film we're talking, not the 70s TV series.
No, The Fall Guy. So David Leitch, he was also a stunt...
David Lynch?
David Leitch, yeah. I don't think David Lynch was a stunt performer. But David Leitch was a stunt performer. And ultimately, this type of people, they definitely brought another layer of storytelling and into the fight scenes that I feel he didn't have before. So that, which is probably closer to, if you think of Jackie Chan, Donnie Yen, Sammo Hung, all of those people, they were stars in their films. Often they directed their films, and they also did the fights.
Right.
Which is quite interesting.
So what makes a good fight for you then?
So I think one of them, even before the fight happens, some of the most memorable to me is the build-up. So you have a bit of anticipation, you have the tension, there is something that builds up to it. You just don't have the fight suddenly starting. The setting where it happens can actually be really interesting if you think of like in Old Boy, which the whole fight happens in a corridor, or if it happens in one room, or if it happens wherever it is. The choreography is a big part.
Yeah.
And that's probably one.
And what kind of choreography do you like in a fight?
I don't think I have one specifically, but overall I really like it when it feels very brutal and raw.
I've noticed.
Yeah. But having said that, I also, which I have one of the picks to talk in a second, there is a bit of elegance that I also enjoy. When it almost feels more like a ballet.
Yes, exactly what I was going to say.
Okay.
They are my favourite kind of serious fight scenes. Are the ones that feel like a dance.
Yeah, exactly.
An exchange of a dance and something where it feels like you're witnessing some real artistry, not just a brutal punch-up. I like some of those things occasionally. But the other thing I was going to say is that I really love in a fight scene is comedy. Some of my favourite comedy scenes are actually fight scenes. I've chose several that are actually sort of full-on sort of comedy scenes. Well, they are to me anyway. At least one of them's intentional.
No, you have some really
some
good
of them
ones.
maybe not
I have one as well. I guess two other things I wanted to mention. I love a fight scene where it helps advance the story in any way, whether it is some form of character development or it is a plot point that gets resolved. And those are the ones that I remember the most. Also, how it's filmed, and that's definitely something that I feel in the last 20, 30 years, with some exceptions that we could talk about, which we'll do shortly, maybe from the 80s, etc. But the blocking, where they put the camera, I think we've gotten a lot better, partially because of the technology. How the camera moves, you're right.
And so often now it's handheld, isn't it? Whereas, and it just helps so much, like a handheld camera, because it just lends itself to the fight.
To your point that you were saying before, the sound. Which probably you want to talk a bit more about that.
Well, not especially, other than the fact that as far as Foley sound goes, is there a sound that is more important in the history of cinema than the sound of the punch? I mean, the sound of an actual punch Actually, that wasn't bad.
Well, that was a punch against.
That didn't hurt, did it?
Against yes.
I mean, that wasn't bad. I mean, but if you think about the development of the sound of the punch, it's just got such an unmistakable sound from a movie, hasn't it? And it's a combination of a slapping sound, a crunching sound, and a kind of wet sort of sound as well, isn't it? I was watching a few videos about how they're created. I was going to try and create some of my own special sounds for the episode, but I didn't get around to it in the end. But it's fascinating how they layer up all these different sounds to create the classic punch that we now think of today.
And I think, to your point, when you were saying at the beginning of the podcast about 50% or more is sound, which I don't fully agree, but in one thing that I agree is that sound is what makes a fight feel more brutal.
Yes.
Or not. Because if you think some of the fights that we have, if you change the sounds between the films, suddenly becomes a lot more comedic.
Also, a lot of the time, they're not really hitting each other. They're not really punching each other, physically hitting each other.
Well, I hope so.
Well, I hope. I mean, occasionally, yes. But a lot of the time, it's that illusion, isn't it? It's the illusion of where the camera's been blocked, how the camera's moving, and that sound. And you get those things right, those elements right, and you've got the perfect punch, and nobody's actually hurt. And that's the amazing thing about the fight scene.
What is not a fight? For example, in Rogue One, when Darth Vader kills everybody at the end, which is by far my favorite scene in the Star Wars series, that's a massacre. That's not a fight. Because
I agree.
It only comes one way.
We're talking hand-to-hand combat in this episode.
Hand-to-hand or weapons?
Yes, there are some weapons involved, but weapons operated by hands that aren't mechanized.
Unless you want to operate it with feet. That's up to you.
There are a lot of feet. There's a lot of foot memory.
So my number 5 is a pick from a superhero movie.
Oh.
And superhero films, I feel they're, in general, very boring when it comes to fights because they're not really grounded in reality and you don't really feel the stakes. The one exception to that, to me, which is Captain America, the Winter Soldier, and it's the elevator fights.
Yes, and he's a man that likes a good punch-up, isn't he, Captain America, as far as superheroes go.
Well, I don't know if... I'm going to guess you didn't watch this in the cinema.
I didn't.
So Winter Soldier, obviously, there's already been Captain America, the first Avenger, but for the Winter Soldier, they brought the Russo brothers to direct, which are the guys that also did Civil War, and they did the 2 Avenger movies. And they definitely redefined what Captain America could be in a film, and it was a lot more gritty, a lot more brutal. I would argue the best fight scene in a superhero film. And it's also a kind of a master lesson in tension building, because what you have for 2/3 of the scene, there is Captain America, he's in the headquarters of S.H.I.E.L.D., and clearly there is something dodgy going on. There is a lot of those people working for S.H.I.E.L.D. that are actually not the good guys, they're the bad guys. And Captain America is starting to realize that. So he gets into the lift to leave S.H.I.E.L.D., and as the lift is closing, a few guys come in. They're meant to be allies of him, especially one of them starts chatting with him. And he starts to gradually see that there is some weird things happening with them. He noticed that someone is holding a taser bar a little bit closer when it's in a lift with him, shouldn't be. Then the lift stops in another floor. A few more people get in. This time they have suits, they have briefcases. But again, he notices that one of them, they have a sweat falling down. Another floor comes down, and this time 3 big guys enter. And that's when he realizes. And you have the iconic moment, which I love, just before the action actually kicks in, where everyone is quiet, the lift is coming down, and he says the iconic line now.
Before we get started, does anyone want to get out?
And the fight, I would love to say that in the lift. I need to do that with you one day.
You can say it on the way out.
Well, it's going to be just the 2 of us. The fight starts super explosive. I think it only lasts probably 90 seconds. It's 9 people versus 1, and that one person is a superhero, so they really need to
up their game. I mean, what were they thinking?
Well, to be honest, they're kind of ready. They had the taser bars to knock him down. They have like a bit of a magnetic handcuff that they attach him to a wall.
Now, I don't know about you, but I think I'd want a bit more than that against Captain America. Maybe a Star Destroyer.
Yeah, I don't know if you can fit that in an elevator. But what I love about the fight is that it feels extremely claustrophobic, because you have 9 big guys with him, which is not a small guy, in this tiny elevator, and he's fighting everyone, and the fight goes super fast. You see really cool shots, like when he throws one of them against the CCTV and the CCTV camera breaks, and it just goes in a second, and it's super intense. Then the fight finishes, and you have that iconic shot where it's top down, and it's just literally you don't even see the floor, it's just covered with people, which kind of reminds me a little bit, and I'm sure they took it from here, Old Boy. You have the fight in the corridor. After that, he dials a lift, and the lift opens, there is lots of bad guys, and then the next scene is the door opening, and there is him coming out of the lift with the whole floor covered with it kind of reminds me of this. It's almost showing what you didn't get to see in that film. But it's a really good fight that goes in a blink of an eye, but at the same time you have all of that tension building. What's your number 5?
My number 5 is Bruce Lee versus Kareem Abdul-Jabbar from the film Game of Death, which was originally shot in 1972, but then finished 5-6 years later after Bruce Lee's death in 1973 by the director of Enter the Dragon, Robert Clouse. Clouse? Not sure how to pronounce it, to be honest. But, I mean, you can't have a fight list. Santa Claus. But you can't really have a fighting list without Bruce Lee. I mean, his influence is so massive on the genre, isn't it? And not just the genre of film genre. You know, I was watching this fight again early with it just before it, and you just look at, there's so many moves in it that, you know, you think of like Street Fighter 2 and all those one-on-one fighting computer games from the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and like there's barely one of them that doesn't possess one of the moves from this fight sequence. So,
and the sound effects. Yeah.
And the sound effects, yeah. I mean, the sound effects are absolutely stupendous in this scene. They're so silly. They're so over the top. But anyway, if you don't know who Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is, he was a 7'2" basketball player who befriended Bruce Lee in 1967, learnt all the martial arts, largely with Bruce Lee, I think. And he wasn't just a basketball player. He was the best basketball player in the world. You know, he was 6-time NBA MVP, most valuable player. And, you know, and if you're still not sure who he is, he even appears as the co-pilot in Airplane.
I was going to say, which film is before? Is it this one?
No, Airplane's late. Airplane's about 1980. It's about 7 years later, 8 years later. But yeah, what I love about this scene is so many things. But like, you've got the tall guy against the little guy. I don't know how tall Bruce Lee is. Presumably he's not that tall. Maybe 5'8", 5'9". But you know, he's super skinny, he's super mobile, and then you've got this super skinny tall guy who incidentally in the film is called a character called Mantis, and he's the 5th floor guardian. So even the whole concept of this film is like a computer game, you know. And I don't know whether that was the original intention or not, or whether they changed it a bit later on. So they had to reshoot several scenes using a stunt double for Bruce Lee in places to sort of pad things out, and there was all sort of complications with it. But you know, so it wasn't like the original film. The original film got abandoned so Bruce Lee could make Enter the Dragon, by the way. But the scene itself, it's the tall guy against the little guy, and their styles are completely different. And Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is so tall, he's literally like a praying mantis. When they first exchange, when I think Bruce first hits him, and Kareem hits back with his foot. It gives him like a massive kick, and it kicks him straight in the chest. Bruce Lee
flies away.
Down, flies away, stands up, and you can see his size 17 feet imprint on his chest. It's brilliant.
Actually, now that you're talking about the imprint, the dress, or I guess the costume that Bruce Lee is wearing, it became a lot more famous later on. Because it was already iconic, but it's the one in Kill Bill.
Yeah, and now
Thurman is wearing.
Definitely, and now when you think of Bruce Lee, well, whenever I think of Bruce Lee, I always think of him in this costume. And you know, and I read a bit about, you know, what people consider Bruce Lee's best fight to be. And a lot of people say, oh, it's the one like in the basement in Enter the Dragon, and one against Chuck Norris. But to me, this one surpasses those, because visually you've got something just creative that you don't have in those other fights. This strange concept of this tall, gangly guy against this super mobile little guy. And anyway, it gives Bruce a real chance to show off his skills, and he's cocky as shit. And obviously he eventually prevails, and he does it in real sort of cocky fashion, including one moment where, in very contrived fashion, Kareem's about to push his face into a piece of broken china, and somehow he manages to do like a sort of press up and a handstand over the top of it, you know, just to sort of antagonise him all the more. And then in the end, he manages to kind of smother bother Kareem, and he uses the light to. So Kareem's weakness is the fact that he wears sunglasses, presumably because he's got hypersensitivity to light, which is so good.
He looks cool with those.
He looks very cool, and his outfit's very funny as well. He's got like a sort of nurse's sort of uniform on his top and tiny little white shorts. Anyway, brilliant scene. Go have a look at it if you've never seen it before. It's amazing. What's your number 4?
My number 4, it's from a film from the 2000s, which you were mentioning earlier, and it's Crouching Tiger and Hidden Dragon. And it's the fight that happens in the courtyard duel between Michelle Yeoh, which obviously just won an Oscar or recently won an Oscar for Everything Everywhere All at Once, but she's always been an iconic martial artist, and Zhang Ziyi. I don't know if you've seen many films with her. She became quite big in Hollywood after this film. She was the main star of Memoirs of a Geisha, which was quite controversial because it's a Japanese character, but she's a Chinese actress, so there was a lot of lot of anger there. But this film, it's a film that from a genre point of view is almost like, I think it's called Wuxia, which is this genre of fantasy kung fu that is set in medieval or ancient times in China. And this is where the wire fu comes in, which is that the fights are a lot more like ballet. And in this case, what we have is the character of Zhang Ziyi. She's trying to steal this mythical sword. And Michelle Yeoh notices and she challenges her. So what happens there over the next kind of 5 minutes, it's probably my favorite fight of combat with weapons.
And there's a lot of weapons.
And there is a lot of weapons, exactly. So Zhang Ziyi, she's just fighting with this mythical sword that it clearly has powers, and it's almost unbreakable. It's almost like a duet where each weapon, it feels like a different stage of the conversation in a way, because what you have is initially Michelle Yeoh, which is clearly a more experienced fighter. She's a better fighter. She gets a sword. They fight sword versus sword. But then the sword that Michelle Yeoh is using breaks into 2 swords. So she's basically 2 versus 1. Then Zhang Ziyi breaks the 2. Then she gets a spear. Sword versus spear. So it's a very different choreography there. And both of these actors or actresses, they're clearly martial artists. So all of this is for real. There is moments, there is setups where they're using body doubles. Main reason is that Michelle Yeoh, apparently in an earlier scene in the film, she tore her ACL, so she couldn't do some of the wide shots. But she did some of the medium shots and close-up shots, and you can definitely see that both of these people are very, very good at fighting.
And very good at moving, because this is, like I was saying before in the intro, this is one of those fights.
Yeah, it feels balletic, like a ballet. It's very balletic.
Yeah, and it is beautiful.
And it's extremely elegant.
Yeah.
And then even you have a moment where it's, again, going back to your point that you made earlier on comedy, where among the weapons that Michelle Yeoh keeps getting, because the sword that Zhang Ziyi is using, it's so powerful that it keeps destroying all of the other weapons, she catches this heavy mace that she's trying to attack with, but she falls back. So even you have that moment of levity in between the fight. And then ultimately she breaks the sword, the last sword that Michelle Yeoh is using, but it breaks the heart, but it still manages to get it close to her neck. So kind of the fight ends, but she still doesn't return the sword. There is a little bit of element here of pride and of mentorship, because clearly Michelle Yeoh is a lot more of an experienced fighter, that she's genuinely trying to teach her a lesson, but she just doesn't want to learn and doesn't want to listen, and still want to catch that fight, that magical sword with her. What's your number 4?
Number 4, I've gone for something to really contrast my first one and your ones. I've gone for a fight scene, a very well-known fight scene from John Carpenter's They Live from 1988. So if you don't know what They Live is, it's a sci-fi low-budget B-movie, really. It wasn't very much a B-movie. And, you know, despite the fact that John Carpenter had had several hits beforehand. And it starred a wrestler from the WWF, as it was called then. WWE, it's called now, isn't it? Roddy Piper, who was a wrestler that I sort of knew at the time. And he plays this character called Nada. And the fight with his co-star of the film, Keith David, who isn't a wrestler, who's just quite a big guy. He's quite a big, dangerous-looking guy. So they make a good match for each other.
They both look scary.
And so the concept of the film is about a drifter who comes into this town, finds this magic pair of glasses. Well, not magic. They're kind of like scientifically modified glasses that allow you to see the world for what it really is. And what the world really is in this film is it's run by aliens, and all the messages and writing in the city are actually signs and things that it's telling you about, and about the oppressive nature of this world that they're living in. And so this scene is about Nada trying to get Keith David's character to put these glasses on. And it's ridiculous because the scene goes on for about 6 minutes and it's two guys properly slugging it out in a dirty fashion, and the whole time all Nada wants to do is get him to put the glasses on. He just keeps saying, I'm going to give you a choice, put on these glasses or start eating that trash now. Try these on, put these on, try these on. I'm trying to save you and your family's life. And he just won't take it, and they just keep slugging it out, and they're two big guys. It's a really unelegant fight. It's the exact opposite to the Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon fight, because it's two guys.
It's probably closer, even though it goes for a long time, but it feels more like the type of fight that you would imagine in an alley happening after a night out.
I guess it feels more real. There's certain moves in it that feel very much like American wrestling moves.
Yeah.
And then there's other moments you feel like, it's actually quite real. There's even a moment where a Rowdy Roddy Piper Nada smashes... Oh, no, the other guy, Keith David, smashes the window, and it turns out it's his car, and Roddy laughs at it, and it just feels so real. It's a very sort of natural moment, which I really like.
And apparently most of the fight was choreographed by themselves.
Yeah, and it shows because it feels...
Well, there's a few moments that it feels like you're watching a wrestling match.
Yes, and it's quite frustrating. And also, the whole time, you feel this kind of sense of tension because it's like, just put the glasses on for Christ's sake. But he will not put them on. And you keep seeing him, the glasses in different positions, and you're thinking, he's going to stamp on them any moment. And he doesn't stamp on them. And you're just waiting for it to happen. And it's just pure relief. And finally, the outcome is what you want it to be.
I think what I love as well about this fight, which it happens sometimes of certain types of comedy, like Tim Robinson, for example, which is that a joke goes for a bit too long, and first it's funny, then it's not, and then it becomes even funnier.
Exactly.
And this is the same. This is the equivalent of that type of joke, which is that the fight goes for so long that first it's exciting, then it's like, where the hell is going this on? And then you enjoy it again.
Yeah, it's unusual like that, isn't it? Because, it isn't a comedy scene, but it is funny and it is serious at the same time. What's your number 3?
Well, my number 3, talking about comedy scenes, it's from City Lights, 1931 by Chaplin. And to me, this is the pinnacle of visual comedy, and this is the pinnacle of funny fights. It's so...
And boxing.
Well, actually, that's a good point. We have our... I'm not going to spoil any of the other lists, but this is the boxing pick that we have.
It is, yeah.
And
It was a close shout between this and...
Well, actually, what would be your other pick?
Rocky 4.
Really? Interesting. So I was debating whether including... I don't know if you... Did you watch Creed?
I haven't watched the Creed films.
Oh,
no.
really? The first one is really good. It's by Ryan
I've
Coogler.
heard, yeah.
So there is a fight in that film that is all in one shot, in a continuous shot, and the
nice.
camera is moving between it. It's incredible. The choreography is amazing. But anyway, go back to Chaplin. The reason I picked this fight is that it's visual comedy at its best. And I know that you were saying that 50% of a fight is sound. I guess this fight relies a lot more on visuals. And it does an amazing job. So Chaplin plays the tramp. Obviously, he's an iconic character. And he's hoping to win money for this blind flower girl that the story is about. And so he decides to enter a boxing ring completely unprepared. And what you see is he clearly doesn't want to fight. He wants to win the money, but he clearly doesn't want to fight. And the choreography that happens is incredible. I think they rehearsed the sequence for 6 weeks. It's mainly on wide shots, and most of the choreography happens within the frame.
Let's just say the referee plays a big part.
Exactly. So the main of the choreography is basically between the referee, Chaplin, and the other fighter. And it becomes sillier and sillier, where initially Chaplin is ducking in between the referee and the other fighter. Then at some point, The referee, it gets so confused that it starts to fight the other fighter. And then even they play, even though it's a silent film, they use the sound effect of the bell when the round finishes. And at some point, that bell becomes another prop within the story, which Chaplin, he doesn't want to fight, so he keeps pressing the bell to get out of the ring, and the other fighter keeps pressing the bell to get back in the ring.
And the fighter looks a real bruiser as well, doesn't he? It looks like he would give Chaplin a right good kick.
Yeah. But it's a hilarious... Actually, I'll say who is. It's Hank Mann, which I don't know if he's done other Chaplin films, but the choreography that he does is incredible. And again, even though we were talking about Crouching Tiger and Hidden Dragon as a ballet, this is arguably even more, because the choreography between those three people to some of the moves that they need to do, it's genuinely, clearly so much rehearsed.
A comedic ballet.
It's a comedic ballet, but a ballet nonetheless. It's very inventive. It's, to me, I genuinely was almost on tears.
It's funny and frustrating in equal measures. As a lot of those kind of comedy scenes are from those films.
Yeah. What's your number 3?
Number 3, I've gone for a very famous fight scene from a very terrible movie from 1993 called Undefeatable. Now, in 2006, this became like really big news on the internet because it somehow became viral as being the worst fight scene of all time.
Did it?
Yeah. Yeah, and it was everywhere for ages, being the worst fight scene of all time.
I remember a video early on YouTube.
Yeah.
Like, I can't remember which year it was, but probably the first year or second year of YouTube back in whenever it came out. And it was the top. I still remember the text that appeared. It was top, like, worst acting of all time. Yeah. And one of it was the bad guy in this fight.
Yeah, who is, well, as far as I'm concerned, he's bloody brilliant.
He's an incredible fighter.
He's hilarious. He's hilarious if you're looking for a comedian. So anyway, this film is actually by a Chinese director called Godfrey Ho. So it was a Hong Kong production, but the 3 stars of this scene were actually American actors. So this film was a Cynthia Rothrock vehicle. If you don't know who Cynthia Rothrock was, she was a kind of like sort of America's female answer to Jean-Claude Van Damme, and she starred in loads of films in the late 80s, early 90s, most of which were actually Chinese productions, which I didn't realise at the time.
So they shot this film in Hong Kong?
I think so, yeah. Yeah, well, maybe they shot it. Was certainly a Hong Kong production. And so the main fight scene that I'm talking about here is actually between Detective Nick DeMarco and he's fighting the end of the film bad guy Stingray, who happens to be impersonating a doctor in the scene.
I think if
you're wondering why he's dressed like
if your name is Stingray, you're gonna be the villain in the film.
It's a terrible name. And at one point, Cynthia Rothrock does join in with the action, except that she's got a sling on at the time. So the fight starts off in absolutely ridiculous fashion. There's all these really weird glances at each other, and it's all very homoerotic. And at one moment, John Miller, Detective Nick DeMarco, rips a piece of shirt off the other guy's back. And he rips it off and he looks at it. And he just looks back at him and just sort of throws it in the air. And it's just an amazing look on his face. It's hilarious. And then the two of them, in an even more of a homoerotic exchange, rip each other's shirts off. Well, they rip their own shirts off, sorry, and look at each other. And then I think they get knives out, don't they? And Stingray gets his knife out and he licks it. And it's really gross. And anyway, the fight starts. When the fight actually starts, it's actually pretty good.
The fight is very good.
It's actually pretty well good.
And the fighters are genuinely very good.
Yeah, they're very good. They're very big, muscular guys. They're kind of scary and look kind of funny. They're kind of a little bit Jean-Claude Van Damme-like, I suppose, in a way. And Stingray, by the way, has got a really terrible sort of curly mullet. There's this amazing part in the early sequences where they do close-ups of both their faces and they show like a slow-motion punch hitting their face.
Which is not really in slow motion.
No, but it's flipping brilliant. I could watch that again and again. I love that. I used to do things like that with my friends years ago, where you just do slow motion punches at each other and film it or whatever.
They didn't have enough money for a slow mo, and they decided to do it for real.
It's so good. It's brilliant, and the fight continues. It gets more and more extreme.
So you have to tell the ending, please.
I will tell the ending. And so Cynthia joins in, and when Cynthia joins in, they start getting the better of Stingray, and Stingray starts getting a bit of a lashing. I think one of them kicks him, and Stingray falls into a nail. It goes straight into his eye.
Yeah, they kick him against the wall, and in the wall there is like a hanger, and he gets stuck on the hanger on the eye.
Horrendous. He pulls it out, continues fighting, which is insane.
As you would.
Obviously with a bit of a disadvantage, and so the fight continues, and eventually they kick the shit out of. Oh, yeah, by the way, Cynthia gets a wet towel out at one point, rings it round and starts whacking him with a wet towel, which is pretty entertaining. And then eventually one of them does like a roundhouse kick on him. He flies into a hook that's on like some mechanized device. Then they set off the hook, which picks him up, and it takes him across the set. But they're in some like industrial sort of set. And then at the end, which is the absolute killer, Cynthia looks at him and she goes,
Keep an eye out for you, Stingray.
and then Nick looks at him, and this is the killer moment. He just looks at him and goes,
Yeah. See ya.
They couldn't.
it's just,
Probably
apparently they came up with their own lines.
I'm gonna guess the writers they wrote both lines. Like, okay, should we use one or the other? And the director was, let's just use both.
I think the actors came up with their own lines.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which is why they're so terrible. So terrible, but so brilliant.
I thought they had 7 writers.
Oh, is there a better end to a fight
I mean,
scene?
I think
not.
this is. Did you watch the whole film?
I have watched the whole film. It's
So
terrible.
I think I've seen other scenes in the film. I haven't seen the full film, but for what I saw, this is of our list. This is the fight that elevates the most a single film, because a lot of the films that we have in our list are actually really good films.
This is a shit film. Don't
This
watch
is
the
a
whole
shit film with a great fight.
film. What's your number 2?
My number 2 is actually a film that is very entertaining. It's probably not as good as some of the others. It's definitely better than Undefeatable.
Oh, yeah.
But the fight is by far the best part of the film. And I would argue it's probably the best fight. Potentially, it's up and running in Hollywood, the best fight of this century, which is from the film Nobody.
It's pretty impressive. But it's only yet number 2.
It's only number 2. I'll get to my number 1 shortly. This film was directed by Ilya Naishuller, and it's very much a film that follows the footsteps of John Wick in many ways. One, that they're obviously using a main character, in this case, Bob Odenkirk, that he wasn't. I mean, this is by far the only action film he's ever done.
Well, I mean, this is the vital difference between the two films, that this is about an everyman.
Exactly.
And who happens to be middle-aged.
You
who's
think
about
he's an
50 or
everyone.
whatever.
You think he's an everyman.
Ah,
It turns out
yes.
he's not. So he's basically like a middle-aged guy. He lives in the suburbs, and he has just a kind of boring life. He gets robbed, and that's when the adrenaline starts to kick in. And he really wants to find people to fight. He really wants to fight those fighters or those people that they rob him, because he almost feels emasculated. Even his son is laughing at him. He said, "Oh, you should be like our neighbor." His neighbor is laughing at him. So he goes at night to try to find the robbers. So he doesn't find them, but he gets into a bus. And he gets into a bus to get back home. And on the journey back home, there is this car with 5 drunk Russian guys that turns out to be kind of a bit like gangsters. And they crash the car. They're super drunk. They've clearly been partying. And they get into the bus. Bob Odenkirk, he's almost telling to himself, like, please get in there. You actually hear the voiceover. And then you have that amazing, again, talking about build-up, where you have the song I Gotta Be Me. I can't remember if it's Sinatra or if another singer of that style, but
I think
it
it's
sounds like Sinatra.
Yeah.
And it looks like he's walking out of the bus. It looks like he's about to leave the bus, because what happens is that these 5 thugs that are surrounding this girl that she's trying to go home. So he closes the door, he pulls out a gun and gets all of the bullets out. He gives a line, the thugs laugh, and then the fight starts. And it is brutal.
Absolutely brutal,
Like,
but very
you
inventive
feel-
as well.
It's so effective, but you feel every punch. And definitely this is one of those fights that to me is a pinnacle, in the sense that it's the most cinematic normal fight does feel, because ultimately the way he fights is pretty normal, but he's just very good at it. And he's also quite resilient. He keeps receiving punches, he gets stabbed.
And inventive.
And very
the way
inventive.
he uses his environment.
Exactly. So he uses seat belts. He uses elements to cover within, like, the poles of the bus, and it is an incredible fight. One of the fighters actually is, which probably some people may recognize from other action films, even though they don't know his name. He was one of the choreographers of the fight, who is Daniel Bernhardt. So he was one of the agents in The Matrix 2 and 3. So he's a really good fighter, and in this one, he's the main guy that he fights him. And the fight keeps escalating. You almost have these 3 stages where initially there is a build-up to the fight, then there is a first round of the fight, then he gets kicked out of the bus.
Yeah, and you think it's over at that
And you
point.
think the fight is over, and they think the fight is over because they have teeth broken, and he gets back into the bus. The guy is bleeding everywhere. You can see that he can barely walk, but he gets into the fight, into the bus again, and that's when he finishes. And he becomes even more brutal. And
Well, one of them even gets a gun out, doesn't he? And before he can fire the gun, he's already smashing it out of his hand with part of the bus.
so if he shot the gun, or if he shot the gun at him, you would disqualify this
I
fight.
would completely disqualify
But
it as a
luckily,
shootout.
luckily it didn't happen. There is elements that feel inspired a little bit like street fighting, like Krav Maga, but also it's very much that it feels like improvised and very, very realistic. And this is where you have the example of someone that directed the film, that he clearly has an action background and an understanding of what choreography for fighting should be. And also, yes, there is a lot of elements that feel very much handheld, and they use the camera to help tell the story in a better way.
It's also a little bit funny in places, despite the brutality, especially the moment where I think he sort of strangles him with part of the, you know, those things like on buses, like those wires which you pull to make the bus stop, where like there's a sign comes up. So he pulls that around at one point, and it cuts to a shot of it saying "bus stopping ding, bus stopping ding, bus stopping ding" as he's strangling him with it, which is blatantly for laughs.
Yeah. And Bob Odenkirk, he is incredible.
Yeah, he really
Like, the
is.
training-
I mean, he's a great actor, isn't he?
He's a great actor, but if you watch in any other films and obviously TV shows famous for Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad, I wouldn't even imagine in a million years that he was starting on an action fight.
Which made it all the more exciting, this film, because it was like, yay, Bob Odenkirk as an action star, like when the film came out, and that's why I watched it straight away. Because, you know, I've been watching him for years in Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. I don't watch many TV shows, so he's quite close to my heart because of that. So it was quite exciting.
And I think even though this fight is very much on the wake of John Wick, the difference is that John Wick, yes, he gets hit occasionally, but he doesn't really suffer to the level that this guy does. This guy, by the end, he can barely walk, and he's probably has multiple bones broken. He's bleeding everywhere, and you feel that pain yourself when you watch it.
You do.
What's your number 2?
Number 2, I've gone for the funniest fight scene of all time from the film that I believe is the funniest film ever. Many others will not, but I certainly do, and it's from the film Top Secret, and it's what I refer to as the underwater bar fight. A fight between the sadly recently passed Val Kilmer as the star Nick Rivers, who is a singer in the film, against the bad guy, the main bad guy of the film, a British actor called Christopher Villiers, who plays this character called Nigel the Torch, who is the head of the resistance, who turns out to be the bad guy and his main enemy. So the fight scene starts off in brilliant fashion. It starts off as a piss take of that Indiana Jones scene, which I spoke about in a previous episode, where they're trying to get control of the vehicle.
Yes.
Do you remember that? And he goes under it. So it starts a bit like that. So they're kind of fighting on the truck. And the funniest joke of that is they're having a fight over the radio station at the same time. So then they get to the bridge. And when they get to the bridge, you see two guys jump off the bridge. Obviously, that isn't Val Kilmer and Christopher Villiers. And then they jump straight into a river. And as they go down the river, you see a shot of them sort of floating underwater more and more, and they get
Falling down.
Yeah, falling down to the floor of the water. And at the bottom, they start having a fist fight. And then, as they're starting to have the fist fight, Christopher Villiers bounces back. And as he bounces back through one of the punches, you see that he's actually in a bar underwater. And there is a barman who pops up from behind the bar and smashes a glass on top of his head.
It's actually very clever, because initially they're fighting at the bottom of the river, and one of the guys gets a stool, just a stool, which you could say, okay, at this point,
you're quite right.
there could be an actual stool underwater. Then hits him with a stool, and he falls back, and there is a tail. It's like, okay, this doesn't feel right. And then the barman appears, so then you know that the whole thing is.
And then it continues as a very sort of comedic fight where Val Kilmer's feet is doing like a sort of boxing move on the floor, where he's kind of dancing his feet, trying to distract the torch, and then they're punching each other in comedic fashion, and then I think one of them flies across the other side, and you reveal other characters that happen to be down there, which is 4 cowboys that are sat playing poker at a table, one of which was the producer of the film, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yes, who insisted on it. So the fight continues, and eventually it finishes with Val Kilmer punching the torch through a window.
I think it finishes with him picking up a cowboy hat.
It does.
And
You're
he says
quite right.
he says goodbye to actually a cabaret dancer.
Yes, and the
So
dancer.
I love how it's gradually building up this whole world underwater.
He doesn't actually speak to her. He just puts the hat on and he does like a gesture to her.
Well, it would
And
be
then-
difficult to speak underwater.
And as he turns, she actually speaks underwater. And she says, hang on, I need a drink. Wait a minute. She says, goodbye.
Exactly like that.
Pretty much, but slightly more elegantly.
You know what? I think if this fight was done, obviously it's a comedy. If it was done in a Mission Impossible film, we could have 3 hours of behind the scenes and interviews with Tom Cruise of how he learned to breathe underwater or how he kept his breath.
So yeah, I mean, it took so much preparation scene. It took 3 weeks to shoot this scene. They had to wear lead belts and weights in their shoes. They both had to learn extensively how to scuba dive. Now, we've got to remember that there's only actually 14 shots in the whole cut of this scene, but and the whole scene goes on for about 3 minutes, I think. So it's not even that long, but it took loads of shooting and it was very dangerous. Like I've heard this really interesting interview with Christophe Villiers, and he's explaining that they were shitting themselves a lot of the time because I think the longest shot in the scene is about 8-9 seconds, which is quite a long time to be sort of concentrating and doing your fighter scene underwater. And then all of a sudden it would cut and they would have to try and get one of the scuba divers to come over and give them some air. So that would take another 5 or 6 seconds a lot of the time. So if they were kind of running out of breath, they'd be like really panicking at the end, and several times they were really panicking. So they were really fearing their safety. They were also very scared about the electricity. This was in a studio, in Pinewood Studio, I think, and obviously in a pool, and there's a really elaborate lighting system around it, and they're scared to death.
I mean,
about things going wrong.
This was not many, but years before, in the same decade, when James Cameron did The Abyss, which was probably the one of the pinnacles of filming underwater. But this was done years before with a much smaller budget, and they still managed to do an amazing action scene.
Yeah, I mean, it is a brilliant sequence. I mean, it's also something that just really influenced me as a kid, so much so that, I think I mentioned this in the Top Secret episode, but, I used to literally go on holiday and put the chairs and tables in the bottom of the pool just so I could try and recreate being in the bar from this fight.
You were fighting everyone that got in the pool. So my number one is a scene from what to me is the best martial arts series of all time. And this film is not from Hollywood, from Hong Kong or from China, but it is from Asia, and it's actually from Indonesia. So of course I'm talking about The Raid and The Raid 2, in this case The Raid 2. And we were chatting in the intro about John Wick and the influences that film had in films coming after, including Nobody. You wouldn't have John Wick without The Raid.
No way.
Like, The Raid truly was a seismic film that completely changed action for the future. John Wick, Nobody, Atomic Blonde, Extraction. Without these films, you wouldn't have any of this.
And who would have thought it would have the recipe for that big influence?
Yeah, I'm from Indonesia, a country that I'm going to guess most people, the only Indonesian films they've watched are actually these two.
Yeah, but with a British director.
Yeah.
Which is a
Gareth
strange
Evans.
combination.
I haven't seen anything before The Raid. I don't know if...
He must have done. He must have done
But
something.
did he move to Indonesia to make these films, or he grew up in Indonesia?
I don't know. I didn't read about that because it wasn't my fight scene.
Touche. I read about the fight. Yeah, to me, this fight is the pinnacle of everything that these two films represent. And they are extremely violent, but the choreography is brutal, but it's also very entertaining. And there is so much happening so fast. The main character of both films is actually, by now, a legend of martial arts and fight scenes, which is Iko Uwais. I think that's how it's pronounced. Probably I'm killing it.
No, you nailed it.
The character he plays is Ramo. And I won't talk about the first film. Obviously, this is about the second.
The first film's amazing, by the way. I love the first film.
first film.
I mean, I like the second one.
The first film, I prefer. The second one to me feels like and I'm going to make a very, very big comparison here. It's like Godfather 2 of Godfather 1. Meaning, bear with me, that they definitely expand on the scope.
Yeah,
and
they do.
It becomes a lot, to me, a lot more of a deeper film, a more of a crime film. While the first one, which I love, it's almost like you're playing a video game.
Yeah, well, it's got a lot of similarities to Game of Death, haven't we? Talked about it
It's
earlier.
basically a series of cops that they get into a building that is full of gangsters and fighters, and they need to get to the top to kill the bad guy.
I actually hate a lot of films that feel like that. There's examples I could give. I mean, 1917 is one example I'll give, but we won't talk about that. But to me, The Raid nails it. It's a beautiful. It's brutal. I mean, I don't know whether beautiful is the right word.
Well, I think it is. I think there is elements that from an action, if you love action fights and action scenes, it's definitely beautiful. And ultimately, this fight is the pinnacle of it, which is the kitchen fight. Mm-hmm. So it's the fight that happens at the very end of the film. The main character is Rama. He's a cop that goes undercover to infiltrate into a crime syndicate in Jakarta. At the other end, you have a character that doesn't even have a name. He's just called the Assassin, who is played by Seseb Arif Rama, who was also the choreographer of the fight. So the two fighters actually choreographed this fight along with the director.
Which is why it's so good.
Which is one of the reasons, even though fight choreographers, they're amazing when they do a great job. But in this case, it definitely helps when you have two people that they're at the peak of the powers when it comes to fighting. They play these two characters that are clearly unbeatable. They have multiple fights throughout the film where they're fighting other characters really powerful, and they beat all of them. And it's almost like the whole film is leading to this moment, which is two trains colliding and seeing what happens. And the fight happens in this kitchen, which by in itself obviously covered in elements that could kill you, let alone having a major assassin in front of you. What I love start away before even the fight starts is that from an art direction point of view, it's something that we didn't really talk before, is that sometimes there is a lot of fight scenes where they don't really pay enough attention to that, where maybe the background is a bit dark, the fight is at night, the characters are wearing dark clothes, and you don't really know what you're watching. In this case, they clearly play with that because the characters, yes, they're wearing dark clothes, but they're in this kitchen that is very bright, is white. And you can imagine where this fight is going, that by the end, it's going to be covered in red. So these two people, they really respect each other. You can see it even at the beginning.
Well, there's a few quite funny exchanges at the start, isn't there? I mean, not quite undefeatable standard, but not too far off in a way.
No,
and
but
a little bit Bruce Lee in a way. In the way
yeah,
that they kind of
I love
copy.
how they are almost checking each other
Yeah.
initially, where they do like a couple of hits and then they go back to the defense position. And then the fight starts. And from a structure point of view, I love that the fight is very much split into three areas or into three different parts. Initially, they're both fighting hand to hand. And they at times, one has the upper hand, the other one has the upper hand. But Rama, throughout the fight, you can see he's a slightly better fighter. So he's beating up the assassin. Up to the point where the assassin decides to get two knives. And those are not just your normal knives that you can just buy in Argos.
I don't know what you call these knives, but they're not very nice.
Well, they're definitely not they're very nice if you're being attacked by them. Basically, they're knives that it's almost like a knife that it gets attached also to your fingers, so you cannot really take it out. Mm-hmm. Genuinely, they feel like assassin knives.
And they're round, aren't they? They're
Exactly.
round.
They're curved. So then you have the assassin with the two knives, and he's fighting him that he doesn't have any. So then the next part of the fight, which is incredible and is very, very tense, you see how Rama is trying to get a knife from him, from his hand, even though it's attached to the fingers, because he literally gets into the holes of the fingers. And then after you see some incredible back and forth between the two, the way that the camera moves as well and the setups that they had is amazing. Some of the angles are so inventive. And then he gets one of the knives with him, and now it's one versus the other. And that's when the music starts to ramp up, even though you can definitely feel every hit. You can feel every cut. They start to cut at each other. And then you get that finale where he literally almost cuts every single part of his body, and it's so brutal. And until he cuts on his neck.
Yeah.
And
also, it's the use of the environment as well. I mean, you were saying like in terms of, yes, it covers it and it destroyed the mess, but it's the way that they use the glass, like the way he smashes in through the glass and into the bottles.
And
whatever.
the kitchen elements, like they get pots, they get elements to throw at each other.
Yeah, and it's slightly comedic at times. You know,
At times, yeah.
You know, despite its brutality, you know, a bit like Nobody. I was just saying there are little moments where there's little playful little hints of comedy.
But the fight, and especially the choreography. Like genuinely, I've probably seen this fight more than all of my other fights that I had in my list put together. And I keep going back. I know that at the moment we were doing the fight scene, so we kept rewatching our fights. But even though this scene or this film is only from 11 years ago, I've watched it so many times, this fight, because it's just perfection. Like the actual fight, it's so good. The choreography that the two have, it feels so raw. It feels so fast. If you love action and you love fight scenes,
You'll love this one.
You'll hate this one. No, you'll definitely love this one.
You've got the two characters fighting each other, but it's almost like the way that the camera works, it's almost like a third character. Like you've got movement, like the camera itself is creating like these little judders at just the right moments. And obviously we've seen that in a lot of fight scenes before, but in this one and the other Raid fight scenes, of course, this is something that was perfected through those two movies, and it just does it so brilliantly. It just makes it feel, and of course this is techniques we'd seen in lots of action films leading up to this point. You think of Paul Greengrass type that documentary style action shots. There is a similarity to
but
that.
I think the big difference to me, and I really like the Bourne films, but the fights, and I genuinely couldn't justify putting one here, is that they're so choppy.
Yes.
I'm
not saying they're as good as these, but
No.
but I'm saying you can see the progression in Western
it's almost
cinema.
getting the best part of that to put it in fights here.
The best part of Western cinema and Asian fight scenes together.
Exactly.
And it's like that's what Gareth Evans has done.
Yeah. What's your number one?
Number one, this involves somebody that we've not talked that much about yet, but we did in the stunt episode. It's a Jackie Chan fight, and it's my favourite fight from Jackie Chan, which is from Police Story from 1985, and it is the shopping mall fight. And the shopping mall fight, it's where the film ends up. It is the final scene of the film. Well, and it's quite a lengthy scene.
This scene is so good that it made it into my top 5 of stunts.
And it's so long that
with
we're
the
able to
pole
have it
jump
in both.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So before that pole jump, there is a fight that goes on for about at least 6 minutes beforehand. And so Jackie Chan plays this Hong Kong police detective who, shall we say, likes to get his hands dirty. And quite literally, he does all these stunts in this film. And it's some incredible sequences in this film leading up to this point. But this one, he saves the best for last. And the reason why this scene is so good is because it's constantly inventive, it's constantly playful, and it uses the environment so perfectly well. I can't think of a better fight scene which uses the environment so well.
And Jackie Chan was famous for that in a lot of his films, but this is by far the pick.
The Raid 2, the fight scene we're just on about there, yes, it does it really well. But
that's less of an environment.
Yeah, but this
is way
uses
more.
a much bigger... it uses virtually the whole shopping mall, doesn't it? So it's also set at Christmas. That's why there's loads of twinkly lights, which obviously play into it, which play into that pole scene that we talked about on the stunt episode. So Jackie Chan is being tracked. So he's tracking down a load of drugs, sort of lords, barons, but at the same time, he's trying to...
Dirty cops as well, no?
Oh, yeah, there are some dirty cops. Yeah, they've not had a wash for ages. And also he's trying to protect a witness, a female witness who is part of their gang as well. And at the same time, he's having this hapless sort of relationship with a brilliant Maggie Cheung, a very young Maggie Cheung, who's really, really great in this film. And he's having this hapless relationship. So you sort of see her at the start of this scene and he sort of wishes him good luck. This scene starts and, it's spectacular from start to finish. But like I say, using the environment, there's one moment where he slides along the floor and sweeps this guy off his feet. There's a moment where he picks some guy off, does a kick and he flies straight down the middle of 2 escalators. So rather than going down the escalators, he goes straight down the bit so it's the middle, which is brilliant. And then he starts to use elements of the shops that they start fighting in. So there's a brilliant moment where there's a clothes rail and he starts spinning around on the clothes rail and then stops picking the clothes rail up and swiping these bad guys with the clothes rail. And there's constantly glass being smashed in this scene. There's so much glass being smashed. They use all the displays, more the shops to great effect. You get loads of moments where there's guys being thrown over stuff and falling in slow motion over glass. At one moment, there is a guy that drives straight into the shop on a moped, which obviously Jackie manages to get him off, takes over the moped, straps the guy to the front of the moped, and then this is probably my favourite part of the whole scene, is where he drives through about 8 glasses of window glasses window glasses, window panes. He drives straight through them with him on strapped to the front of the bike, and then smashes him at the bottom and squashes him at the bottom.
I mean, they use so many elements. And what I love about this, we were talking about, in a way, my pick for the Raid 2 and this one, they go together well in the sense that the Raid 2 to me is almost the pinnacle of one-to-one fight. And this is the pinnacle of one person versus many.
Yes, I mean, how many people does he take
because
out?
He fights so many, and he fights a lot of them. One thing that happens in this film, which is not very common in a lot of action films, is that you have in a lot of these fights the moment where he's fighting 6 people, but you can tell that each of them are almost waiting their turn.
Yes.
And in this one, there is a little bit of that, but in reality, it's so fast that at times there is 2 or 3 people attacking him at the same time. What I also love as well is how most of the fight is in normal speed, but then you have those little moments, like when one character goes through a window or one character falls down, that it goes into a slow-mo, which is really good. It's just using those slow-mo moments as opposed to for the slow-mo punch, like if Undefeatable. And here is actually to show something that it wouldn't even benefit if you do it in normal speed. It's almost to add drama.
He's very fast as well. Like, he's so fast. Like, when there's like several guys all taking him on at once, there's just arms, legs coming from everywhere. And I like the way that it uses the occasional close-up. There's a moment where his head just gets smashed against the glass and it just shows up and you just really see the pain on his face. And you see a moment where it just suddenly cuts to like a shoe just kicking him straight in the side of the face. You know, yeah, like I say, much better than like how it does it in Undefeatable, because it is sort of funny, but at the same time it's sort of believable the way it's done. You feel the sense of danger and you can see the sort of pain.
Oh yeah,
in
especially the pain when, I don't know if you remember, when Mary Chen gets thrown against the glass and you see in slow motion and you can see her screaming and you can almost feel the pain there. I think Jackie Chan is the best fighter of all time in cinema.
Yeah, I think he's the most inventive.
Well, I think it's more than the most inventive. I feel that sometimes, ultimately, Bruce Lee is always going to have the upper hand because he was before. He's arguably more iconic. He also died young, which I think it plays a big part almost to build on the iconography.
But he
and
also
the legend.
looks great. And that's the thing with Bruce Lee. He's more iconic in the sense that, you know, his bone structure, his figure is so impressive. You know, it's not just about his fighting
back
skills.
then, it was mainly him. Like, he actually invented. In a way, he kind of invented the genre. Yeah. But the difference to me is that Jackie Chan, in some of the films, and this is one of the examples, like, he is brutal the way he fights.
He is brutal, but it's not brutal in the sense that the Raiders, you don't see much blood and gore. But yeah, the violence is there, but without that. So it's almost like a PG rating. So
exactly, but he also manages to be both brutal but still comedic.
Yeah.
And he's extremely inventive. Like, his choreographies are so inventive.
They really are, yeah. What was I going to say? Also, Jackie Chan. Did you know that Jackie Chan appeared in Enter the Dragon? He does actually.
Yes.
He is like one of the henchmen.
Yeah.
Like, at one moment, he gets a chop from Bruce Lee at one moment. So he must have been very young, Jackie Chan, at that time. He must have been like a teenager at that time, I guess.
The first film I watched from Jackie Chan, that I remember at least, was Rumble in the Bronx. I think it was his first film in Hollywood. And it has one scene that is like a low-key version of this one. It's not as good, but it's that type of thing where he's fighting with a step ladder. He fights with an armchair that has wheels.
Yeah.
But it's nowhere near as fast and as inventive and as dangerous as this one is.
So, yeah, I mean, it's pretty special. So just after the stunt scene that we talked about in the stunt episode, there's quite a funny scene where he confronts the lawyer of the big boss, and he kind of fights the lawyer and the big boss, and he does that in pretty spectacular fashion, where he just loads of super quick punches to the stomach, because these guys aren't really fighters as well. These are kind of like guys at the top or whatever. These aren't really. So it's kind of more entertaining when he takes it out on them at the end. And then after he does that, the film just stops just like that, and just like, hang on a minute, what's going on here? The film just stops and it just goes straight into the behind the scenes sequence. Do you remember that?
All of the
It's
Jackie
so
Chan
funny.
films.
It's like there's no sort of epilogue. It's like the epilogue is, let's see what happened. Let's see how they made the film.
I love how Jackie Chan always does that, which almost deflates the tension that he's been building. It's like, okay, you thought this was real, but it's actually, we're going to show you behind the
it's
scenes
a very strange technique
of every fight. But he always does it.
If you've never seen Police Story, highly recommend it. It is a lot of fun. There are some brilliant action sequences in it. There's a car sequence where they go over like a sort of a kind of shanty town, which is absolutely ridiculous, which is very entertaining. And like I say, there's some very funny scenes between Jackie Chan and Maggie Cheung as well, who plays his girlfriend.
Well, the fact that Police Story features in both our top stunts and top fights should hopefully give enough of a hint that they should watch it.
And finally, did you realise that it is MovieMambo's 1-year birthday today?
Is it today?
It's today! So happy birthday, you.
Happy birthday, you too.
Well, just to finish, I've got this cake. Here you go. And just like the candles. There we go. There we go.
Triple chocolate.
There you go. Very, very big flames. Jesus Christ.
For another year of fun.
Quick, put it out. If you enjoyed that episode, please take a second to rate, like, and subscribe.
Well, why not drop us a line on Instagram, TikTok, or Letterboxd and let us know if there are any subjects or topics that you would love us to cover.
Right, I'm going to go crazy with sound effects at the
That
end.
was good.
Don't
That
worry.
was
It
good.
sounded shit then.
No,
it's
no,
going to sound good.
We should finish the episode and then play the behind the scenes.
Never.
Is it 1 year? Ah, congratulations.
Congratulations. 37 episodes.